for the second of the last keynote speeches of the day. And I was very happy when Anna-Michelle Asimakopoulou accepted to speak at the event. She's a member of the European Parliament for the EPP group, as so many of you know, and vice chair of the Committee on International Trade. And she is known for her work on tech and trade issues, among many other things, as well as her focus and commitment to the transatlantic relations between the EU and the United States. She has many interesting messages and ideas to share regarding international collaboration and consensus with digital sovereignty means as a response, what it should be about, and relations with China. And this is definitely something that concerns AI in the EU. So welcome, MEP Asimakopoulou, and let's hear from you. And thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Aline, for that introduction, and esteemed colleagues who are watching and participate in today's event. I'm very honored to be speaking today at the European AI Policy Conference, and I'd certainly like to thank the Center for Data Innovation for this invitation. Today we've heard some fascinating and very high-level discussions, and they definitely show that AI is what I like to call the flavor of the decade, of the digital decade, so to speak, because AI is certainly key to achieving Commission President von der Leyen's ambitious goal to make this decade Europe's digital decade. This is what she said in her State of the Union address a few months ago. And AI is one of the technologies that she highlighted in her inauguration speech last November, when she set the goal for Europe to achieve mastery and ownership of key technologies in Europe. But our Commission President von der Leyen also stressed was that Europe must deepen and refine its partnerships with its friends and allies and be ready to build a new transatlantic agenda. And this is to strengthen our bilateral partnership in trade, tech, and taxation. The results of the elections across the Atlantic have created positive expectations here in Europe for a return to multilateralism, to collective action, to global leadership in defending democratic values, and perhaps a fresh start in transatlantic cooperation. Ergo, the EU draft plan that surfaced just a few days ago, entitled A New EU-US Agenda for Global Change, where tech and AI are prominently featured. Europe now calls on the US to seize what it calls a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a new global alliance and meet the strategic challenge posed by China. It suggests specifically that the EU and the US use their combined influence to create what's called a transatlantic technology space, which will form the backbone of a wider coalition of like-minded democracies. This would, of course, include cooperation on AI, which is very rapidly becoming both an enabler for economic development and social well-being, but also at the same time a powerful tool for authoritarian control. At the heart of all these lively discussions taking place these days in Europe and globally about AI are technological, ethical, legal, and socioeconomic aspects, as well as geopolitical strategic considerations. In this new techno-political world order, what's at stake in the AI race is nothing less than our core values, that is liberty, equality, and justice, the values that underpin free and open societies. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has been an accelerator for everything digital: data collection and processing for research and development to analyze the virus and to find a vaccine, contact tracing apps. These are just two prime examples. The pandemic has revealed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the key role that digitization plays in responding to this global crisis, and has also forced us to reevaluate interconnections in the global economy and admit that we have some pretty dangerous dependencies and worrying vulnerabilities. Dependencies, for example, on video telecommunication technologies for work, for education, for many functions of our daily lives, even socializing, and vulnerabilities in a global supply chain for basic necessities like masks, like medicine, like ventilators. Today, more than ever, we can't take this issue lightly, and we need swift action for our own security and resilience. In the digital domain, China is investing billions in AI and 5G and quantum computing and chip fabrication as part of a strategy launched in July 2017 to establish itself as the world's AI leader. By the year 2030, it expects to have a domestic AI industry which is worth at least $150 billion. China steals IPR. It tries to dominate international standard-setting bodies, and it lures country into its techno-orbit through the Digital Silk Road Initiative. China has 1.4 billion people to produce data, and its own robust techno giants are generously supported with state aid and are protected from competition, so long, of course, as they return the favor in order to support the Communist Party's surveillance state. Now, across the Atlantic, say what you will about President Trump, and there's actually a lot to say, but he was right to recognize that China was and still is a major threat to America's digital supremacy worldwide. He gave Europe a wake-up call, too, and made us realize that maybe it's naive, to say the least, to think that we can have a strategic partnership with a systemic rival. However, while President Trump maintained the overall, let's say, tech laissez-faire approach in order to support economic growth and maintain U.S. technological leadership by protecting his tech giants, what he failed to recognize is the importance of collaborating with like-minded countries like the EU member states, like Japan, like India, partners that prefer international agreements, multilateral rules, and that share values that are much closer to the United States than to China. Europe has responded to U.S. techno-giant dominance and Chinese aggressive ambitions by setting its own geopolitical priority in tech independence, termed in the Brussels bubble ease as strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty. Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic emphasized, we can make Europe more resilient by boosting our open strategic autonomy and building a digitally sovereign future. This potential of new dependencies, namely on holders of certain critical technologies related to AI, who use them in an autocratic manner, as well as those controlling large volumes of data, is why Europe is striving to create its own open yet sovereign single market for data. That's what Commissioner for the Internal Market, Thierry Breton, called it, because it's crucial for AI development during the presentation yesterday of the Commission's proposed new rules for data governance. So clearly, AI is a key, let's say, to achieving European digital sovereignty as part of this overall strategy of open strategic autonomy. Europe is working very hard to be at the forefront of the technological revolution, to ensure competitiveness, to shape the conditions for the development and use of AI for our rights and our values. The European institutions, the Commission, the Council of Europe, the Parliament, we're all putting this human-centric AI approach at the heart of our reflections and legislative work. This is true in the Parliament, in the European Parliament, and the many standing committees that are dealing with AI issues like civil liability, like intellectual property, military uses, and in this new special committee on artificial intelligence in the digital age, the INTA committee. My colleagues and I are taking a horizontal approach in creating a long-term roadmap for AI in Europe and focusing on specific economic sectors in this upcoming report, a draft of which we hope will be available in April of 2021. So overall, Europe is advocating a model that strives for balance, to provide flexibility so that there's room for innovation and scalability, to safeguard competitiveness and leadership, to build trust, and to protect citizens' rights. Just as it did with the GDPR, where Europe used its economic, let's say, weight and regulatory power to create a gold standard for privacy regulation, it will try to achieve through the so-called Brussels effect with its AI human-centric regulatory framework, the same thing, to force the hand of the global tech world to conform to our European values and standards. And having said all this, I just want to stress that while digital sovereignty is a laudable response to external threats, weaponizing digital trade relationships will only take you so far, and it's very likely that it'll eventually backfire. So just to put it simply, Simply stated, protection is a good idea, but protectionism is not a good idea. And there's a lot of discussion about what the meaning of open strategic autonomy actually is. Is it legitimate protection or is it covert protectionism? I like to use the Greek roots of the word. Autonomy comes from the Greek word autonomia. It literally comes from authos, which means self, and nomos, which means law. And it means that your freedom, or rather your right, to make your own rules. And making these rules in Europe is what's produced our commonly shared values: democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. So in this context, Europe really should demand transparency and fairness and ensure accountability of its tech giants, but it shouldn't refuse to see them also as strategic partners where there's added value from this cooperation, like in Gaia X, where it was recently joined by Microsoft. So the proposed transatlantic, let's say, rapprochement needs to get past these fractious disagreements about privacy rights, about data flows, about competition rules and taxation. And the EU and the US have to come together to reach workable and mutually beneficial compromises to promote AI rules and standards based on openness, interoperability, and competition. And if this is done at the transatlantic level, I really think the result could be truly formidable and a beacon of light that many others would follow willingly. And some steps have actually been taken towards this strategic alliance. The US has joined, as you know, the OECD principles on AI, and this partnership, or even the G7 or other international groups, could set global standards for AI and international rules of conduct that reflect our democratic values. What we need, ladies and gentlemen, is a formal but a flexible and resilient international geotech alliance that will create consensus at such a scale and a pace that is capable of inspiring on the basis of our value and alluring on the basis of shared interest. At stake is the creation of a global environment based on the principle of value-based digital sovereignty that will ensure human rights, fair trade rules and accountability, and where people and nations could rebuild and seek out prosperity. Europe is openly embracing President Biden's Summit of Democracies, and I think this could be a very opportune moment for AI to be at the heart of the revival of the transatlantic relationship. So I joined my former colleague, Mayette Shake, who is now at Stanford, urging the US to take up Europe's call for setting a joint agenda toward an international democratic order for the digital world. It's become quite obvious, ladies and gentlemen, as of late, that in today's world, in what we're calling the new normal, there are no certainties. And this includes democracy, which has been infected by populism in many countries, from that where it was actually born to those countries that have traditionally championed it. Looking in the mirror, we have to admit that this is because elected government made mistakes and let down their populations who saw their lives deteriorating. Populist governments now threaten democracy not by military force, but actually by using their power to erode established norms and independent institutions. And politics is becoming more and more partisan and polarized and uncompromising. But although democracy is not a given, it's remarkably resilient. It can be compromised, but it can also be reborn out of elections. And this is certainly something people around the world that strive for and are inspired by. The EU and the US, ladies and gentlemen, have a long-standing relationship, one based on respect for mutual benefit, on shared values, and on democracy. Ultimately, it's democracy which can reinvigorate, I think, the bond between us. During this window of opportunity, we urgently need to make a choice in the right direction. Choosing to continue our joint path in the digital world guided by democracy, that's most certainly the intelligent choice, artificial or otherwise. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anna Michelle. What a powerful, fantastic speech. It packs a punch. I like a lot the way you've highlighted the many challenges underpinning the EU's digital agenda and its ambitions, including in AI. Thank you for your commitment as policymakers to these important issues. We look forward to seeing more of you in Brussels and in DC next year. To our participants, stay tuned and join me for our next keynote speaker. In a second, I'll introduce someone that many of you in Brussels know. We'll hear the perspective of the EU's next presidency leader, Portugal, about what the AI agenda should look like.